In the isolated mountains of West Virginia, between 1920 and 1960, three Cherokee-descended sisters delivered over 800 babies using ancient rituals that modern science still can't explain. But here's what'll make your blood run cold. Federal documents declassified in 1987 reveal that 127 of those newborns began speaking in voices that their mothers recognized as deceased family members, grandparents, siblings, even husbands who died in the coal mines. The babies would lie in their cribs, not crying like normal infants, but carrying on what could only be described as conversations with the dead, using vocal patterns that acoustic analysis proved were physiologically impossible for their underdeveloped vocal cords to produce. The U.S. government seized every recording, every piece of evidence, and when families started fleeing the region in terror, abandoning their homes, their possessions, everything they'd ever known, federal agents followed up with visits that left survivors too frightened to ever speak about what they'd witnessed. By 1962, 47 families had vanished without a trace, and the three midwife sisters themselves disappeared on the same December night, leaving behind only a journal entry that read, "The shadow men want to use these blessed children for their own dark purposes. We must leave before they come for the babies themselves. This channel isn't for everyone, only for those brave enough to confront truths that challenge everything we think we know about life, death, and the thin veil between worlds. If you've got the courage to explore mysteries that powerful people tried to bury forever, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what state you're watching from. Tonight, we're diving deep into the classified files of Black Hollow, where babies were born already knowing the language of the dead. The remote valleys of Black Hollow nestled deep in the West Virginia Appalachians like secrets kept by ancient mountains, where morning fog rolled through pine. Forests that hadn't seen a logger's axe in generations, and the nearest town lay 40 miles of treacherous mountain roads away. During the harsh decades between 1920 and 1960, when the Great Depression and two world wars ravaged the outside world, this isolated community of barely 300 souls lived much as their ancestors had for centuries, farming small plots of rocky soil, mining coal from dangerous shafts, and bringing their children into the world with the help of midwives whose knowledge had been passed down through bloodlines stretching back to the Cherokee Nation. The winter winds that howled through these mountains carried more than just the promise of snow. They whispered of traditions so old and powerful that even the federal government would eventually take notice. At the heart of this forgotten community stood three sisters whose reputation for safe deliveries had spread throughout the mountain region like wildfire through dry timber. The eldest, known simply as Grandmother Sarah to everyone in the valley, possessed piercing gray eyes that seemed to see straight through to a person's soul and hands that had guided over 800 babies into the world without losing a single mother to childbirth complications. Her voice carried the weight of ancient wisdom when she spoke of the old ways and the bridge between worlds, though few understood the true meaning behind her cryptic words. The middle sister, called Aunt Mercy by the locals, moved through the community like a shadow, collecting rare herbs during specific moon phases and preparing mysterious teas that could ease even the most difficult labor pains. The youngest, Sister Ruth, barely past 40 but already possessing an otherworldly stillness, maintained detailed records of every birth in leather-bound journals, filled with symbols that looked more like ancient pictographs than conventional medical notes. For 4 decades, families traveled from counties as far away as Kentucky and Virginia to seek the sisters' help, drawn by stories of miracle births and infant mortality rates that put even the finest hospitals to shame. The sisters charged modest fees, usually payment in goods rather than cash, and their humble stone cabin became a beacon of hope for women facing the dangerous prospect of childbirth in an era when medical facilities were scarce and often deadly. Local physicians, including the respected Dr. Samuel Morrison, who served a circuit of 7 mountain communities, regularly referred their most difficult cases to the sisters, praising their intuitive understanding of the birthing process and their uncanny ability to save both mothers and babies in situations that seemed hopeless. The Methodist Church in nearby Millfield even blessed their work, viewing the sisters as instruments of God's mercy in a harsh and unforgiving landscape. But beneath the sisters' reputation for healing and hope lay practices that would have horrified the very families who trusted them with their most precious moments. The elaborate rituals performed during labor, the strange chants whispered in languages that predated European settlement, and the peculiar way newborns seemed to emerge from the womb, already listening to voices no one else could hear. These were signs of something far more complex than simple midwifery. As the 1920s gave way to the turbulent decades that followed, observant mothers began noticing that babies delivered by the three sisters were different, in ways that defied medical explanation, exhibiting behaviors that would eventually attract the attention of federal authorities and change the course of consciousness research forever. What these mountain families didn't realize was that they were witnessing the continuation of an ancient practice that blurred the boundaries between life and death in ways that modern science still struggles to comprehend. The autumn of 1923 brought an unusually harsh winter to the remote valleys of Black Hollow, where the morning mist clung to ancient oak trees like ghostly fingers reaching through time. Deep in these Appalachian mountains, where the nearest hospital lay over 100 miles of treacherous mountain roads away, the Anderson family welcomed their third child into the world on October 15th. According to the birth records maintained by the eldest of the Midwife sisters, little Thomas Anderson entered the world with what she described as an unusual stillness. No crying, no fussing, just an eerie calm that seemed to settle over the entire cabin like a heavy blanket. Martha Anderson, a sturdy woman of 28 who'd already delivered 2 healthy children without incident, found herself unsettled by her newborn's behavior in ways she couldn't articulate. The baby nursed normally, slept peacefully, and showed all the expected signs of health that the Midwife sisters assured her indicated a strong constitution. Yet something felt fundamentally different about this child. The way his dark eyes seemed to track movement in empty corners of the room, how he'd grow perfectly still when she hummed lullabies her own grandmother had sung. Most disturbing of all was the way Thomas would lie awake for hours, not crying or fussing, but making soft sounds that didn't quite sound like typical infant babbling. By the 4th day after birth, those soft sounds had evolved into something that made Martha's blood run cold. According to her detailed diary entries, discovered years later in the ruins of the Anderson homestead, Thomas began producing what she described as rhythmic vocalizations that seemed almost like he was trying to tell me something important. The sounds weren't random baby noises. They had structure, pattern, and almost musical quality that rose and fell in waves. When Dr. Samuel Morrison, the circuit physician who traveled between remote settlements, examined the child during his monthly rounds, he noted in his medical journal that he'd never encountered such sophisticated vocal patterns in an infant of this age. What neither Martha nor Dr. Morrison knew at the time was that 3 other families in the surrounding valleys were reporting identical phenomena with their own newborns, all delivered by the same 3 sisters who'd been attending births in Black Hollow for over 2 decades. The Whitmore twins, born just 6 days after Thomas Anderson, had begun making similar sounds that their mother swore sounded like 2 people having a conversation in a language I'd never heard before. But it was what happened during the first week of November that would forever change how the people of Black Hollow understood the true nature of what was occurring in their isolated mountain community. Dr. Harrison Whitmore arrived in Black Hollow on November 12, 1923, his black medical bag bouncing against his hip as his horse picked its way carefully down the Rocky Mountain Trail. A distinguished pediatrician from Johns Hopkins who'd built his reputation on debunking what he called rural medical superstitions, Whitmore had been summoned by increasingly frantic letters from local families describing impossible infant behaviors. The 52-year-old physician, with his wire-rimmed spectacles and meticulously waxed mustache, approached the remote, community with the supreme confidence of a man who'd spent 3 decades explaining away every miraculous medical phenomenon he'd encountered. His leather-bound journal, preserved in the Hopkins Medical Archives, shows his initial dismissive attitude, another case of ignorant mountain folk attributing supernatural causes to perfectly normal infant development. That confidence began to crack within hours of his arrival at the Whitmore household, where he found himself face to face with 7-day-old twins who seemed to be engaged in what could only be described as conversation. Sarah and Rebecca Whitmore lay in their shared crib, making alternating vocalizations that followed distinct patterns. One would produce a series of soft, complex sounds, pause, and the other would respond with equally intricate vocalizations. Dr. Whitmore's medical training told him this was impossible. Infants this young shouldn't possess the neurological development necessary for such sophisticated vocal coordination. Yet his own eyes and ears contradicted everything he'd learned in medical school as he watched the twins maintain what appeared to be dialogue for nearly 20 minutes. The physician's scientific skepticism transformed into urgent fascination when he began recording the infant's sounds using his newly acquired Edison cylinder recorder. According to his detailed notes, the twins' vocalizations exhibited temporal patterns and tonal variations that suggest intentional communication rather than random infant sounds. When he played the recordings back to their mother, Elizabeth Whitmore broke down in tears, insisting that some of the sounds were identical to words her deceased father had used when speaking in his native Welsh, a language the twins had never been exposed to. Dr. Whitmore's journal entries from this period reveal a man wrestling with phenomena that challenged his fundamental understanding of infant development and human consciousness. Over the following week, as Dr. Whitmore examined 6 more infants displaying similar behaviors throughout the valley, his meticulous documentation revealed patterns that defied medical explanation. Each child had been delivered by the same 3 sisters. Each had begun exhibiting the unusual vocalizations between the 4th and 7th day of life, and each seemed to respond to the others when brought into proximity. His November 20th journal entry captures his growing bewilderment. "I've consulted colleagues at Harvard, Columbia, and the University of Pennsylvania. None can offer explanations for the vocal sophistication I'm witnessing. More disturbing still, several mothers claim the sounds remind them of deceased relatives." What Dr. Whitmore didn't realize was that his detailed recordings and clinical observations would soon attract the attention of authorities far more powerful than academic colleagues. The sealed envelope arrived at Dr. Whitmore's temporary lodgings on December 3, 1923, bearing the official seal of the United States Public Health Service and marked confidential, immediate attention required. Inside, typed on heavy government letterhead, was a terse directive signed by Assistant Surgeon General Dr. Hugh Cumming himself, requesting that all documentation related to unusual infant vocalizations in the Black Hollow region be forwarded immediately to federal authorities for scientific evaluation and public health assessment. The letter, discovered decades later in declassified archives, specifically mentioned Dr. Whitmore's Edison cylinder recordings and requested his full cooperation in a matter of national medical significance. What struck the physician as particularly odd was how quickly federal authorities had learned of his private research in such a remote location. Within 48 hours of mailing his recordings and notes to Washington, 3 men in dark suits arrived in Black Hollow, driving a black Packard sedan that looked distinctly out of place on the mountain's crude dirt roads. According to the December 8th edition of the Millfield County Gazette, the men identified themselves as federal health inspectors conducting routine surveys of rural medical practices. However, local residents would later testify that these supposed inspectors showed far more interest in questioning families about their infants' behaviors than in examining sanitation or medical facilities. Mrs. Clara Henderson, who ran the local general store, noted in her personal diary that the men asked very specific questions about which babies were making unusual sounds and whether any families had made recordings of their own. The content of Dr. Whitmore's confiscated recordings described in a leaked federal memo dated December 15, 1923, painted a picture that challenged everything mainstream science understood about infant development. The document, stamped top secret and signed by Dr. Charles Davenport of the Carnegie Institution, detailed 7 distinct cases of infants aged 5 to 9 days, producing vocalizations exhibiting grammatical structure consistent with human language. Most remarkably, spectral analysis conducted at Bell Telephone Laboratories revealed that the infants were producing sound, frequencies, and harmonic patterns that shouldn't have been physiologically possible given their underdeveloped vocal apparatus. One particularly disturbing notation mentioned that several recordings contained apparent responses to questions posed by mothers, suggesting cognition levels inconsistent with normal infant brain development. By December 20th, every family in Black Hollow had received visits from the federal agents, who presented them with legal documents requiring their signatures under threat of prosecution for interference with matters of national security. The Appalachian Community Archives contain copies of these intimidating forms, which bound the families to complete silence regarding any unusual infant behaviors observed between October and December 1923. Dr. Whitmore himself vanished from Black Hollow on December 22nd, his landlady reporting that men in suits had helped him pack his belongings in the middle of the night. His final journal entry, found hidden in the floorboards of his room, reads simply, "They've heard something in those recordings that terrifies them. God help us all if they're right." What those federal authorities had discovered in the baby's vocalizations would remain classified for nearly 4 decades, but their swift and decisive action suggested they'd encountered something that posed a threat to the very foundations of accepted reality, the truth about what transpired during those mountain deliveries remained buried until the summer of 1947, when a devastating forest fire swept through Black Hollow, exposing the charred remains of the Midwife sisters' stone cabin and revealing secrets that had been hidden for nearly a quarter-century. Fire Marshal William Kowalski's official report, filed with the West Virginia State Archives on August 14, 1947, described finding ritualistic artifacts and symbols of unknown origin within the ruins, including carved wooden figurines, bronze bowls etched with strange markings, and what appeared to be an altar constructed from local river stones. Most disturbing were the dozens of leather-bound journals, their pages partially damaged but still legible, containing detailed records of births dating back to 1901 and documenting practices that bore no resemblance to conventional midwifery. The journals, written primarily in the eldest sister's careful script, revealed that expectant mothers underwent elaborate spiritual preparations during their final weeks of pregnancy. According to entries translated by Dr. Margaret Thornfield, a folklorist from West Virginia University, the sisters administered specific herbal concoctions made from plants that grew only in certain phases of the moon, particularly a tea brewed from what they called ghost root, a plant that botanists later identified as a previously unknown variety of wild ginger with mild psychoactive properties. The pregnant women were also required to participate in what the journals termed ancestral listening sessions, during which they were exposed to chanted incantations in a language that linguistic experts from the Smithsonian Institution were unable to identify, despite its apparent Celtic and Native American influences. The most detailed journal entries described the actual birthing rituals, which bore striking similarities to ceremonies practiced by pre-Columbian Cherokee medicine women, according to anthropologist Dr. James Mooney's comparative analysis conducted in 1948. The sisters positioned laboring mothers to face specific cardinal directions based on lunar phases, surrounded them with burning herbs that produced thick, aromatic smoke, and maintained continuous chanting throughout the delivery process. Most significantly, the moment each infant drew its first breath, the eldest sister would whisper specific words directly into the newborn's ear. Words that the journal described as the old language of crossing over and the bridge tongue that speaks to those who have walked before us. Immediately following each birth, the sisters performed what they called the presentation ceremony, carefully positioning the newborn at various points around the cabin while speaking in the same unknown language documented in their journals. Archaeological investigation of the cabin ruins in 1948 revealed that these positions corresponded exactly to ancient Cherokee sacred directions, and that the sisters had incorporated numerous Native American spiritual symbols into their practice alongside European folk magic traditions. The most chilling discovery came when investigators realized that the sisters had been methodically documenting which infants developed the unusual vocalizations, noting correlations between specific ritual variations and the likelihood of the children exhibiting what they called spirit speaking. But it wasn't until investigators examined the patterns of families leaving Black Hollow that they discovered the sisters' rituals were having consequences far more profound than anyone had imagined. The first family vanished on a bitter February morning in 1955, leaving behind a breakfast of half-eaten oatmeal still warm on the kitchen table and clothes hanging on the line that would freeze solid before anyone discovered the Hendersons were gone. Sheriff Roy Mackenzie's incident report, filed on February 18, 1955, noted that the family of 5 had apparently packed only essential items, leaving behind valuable possessions including a year's worth of preserved food, hand-carved furniture passed down through 3 generations, and even the family Bible with 4 generations of births and deaths recorded in its margins. Most puzzling was the discovery of their 6-month-old daughter's crib, empty but still warm, with no indication of where the infant had been taken or by whom. Over the following 7 years, this same inexplicable pattern repeated itself with terrifying regularity throughout the Black Hollow region. According to detailed records maintained by the Millfield County Sheriff's Department, 47 families abandoned their homes between 1950, 5 and 1962, always departing suddenly and without explanation, always leaving behind evidence of hasty but selective packing. The abandoned properties, documented in a comprehensive survey conducted by the County Assessor's Office in 1963, shared one disturbing commonality. Every single family had given birth with the assistance of the 3 midwife sisters, and every family had reported unusual infant behaviors in the weeks following delivery. Real estate records show that not one of these families ever returned to claim their property or attempt to sell their land. The circumstances surrounding these disappearances grew increasingly mysterious as investigators attempted to trace the families' destinations. Post office records revealed that none of the departed families had filed forwarding addresses, and bank accounts were closed with cash withdrawals that suggested careful advance planning rather than panicked flight. Most disturbing was the testimony of Martha Whitfield, the local telephone operator, who reported in a sworn statement to state police that several of the families had received late-night phone calls in the weeks before their departures, calls that lasted for hours, but during which she could hear only silence on the line when she attempted to listen in, as was common practice in rural exchanges of that era. The few clues left behind painted a picture of families fleeing from something that terrified them beyond rational thought. Hidden beneath floorboards in the abandoned Morrison homestead, investigators found a hastily written letter dated March 1958, in which the family matriarch wrote to her sister, "The baby won't stop speaking to them, and now we can see them too. They gather in the corners of the room at night, waiting. We have to leave before they take her completely." Similar notes, discovered in root cellars and hidden in barn walls, spoke of infants who seemed to communicate with invisible presences, of families who reported seeing shadowy figures in their homes, and of parents who feared their children were being claimed by forces beyond their understanding. But it was the discovery of the sisters' final journal entry that revealed the true reason why so many families had fled. Black Hollow in terror. The breakthrough in understanding Black Hollow's dark history came in 1961 when Dr. Eleanor Whitehorse, a Cherokee anthropologist from the University of North Carolina, was researching traditional birthing practices for her doctoral dissertation and stumbled upon oral histories that made her blood run cold. According to her field notes, preserved in the Cherokee Cultural Center archives, tribal elders from the Eastern Band spoke of an ancient tradition they called Nve Asgaya, literally translated as children who bridge the worlds. These elders, many in their 80s and 90s, described a practice abandoned by their ancestors in the early 1800s, wherein certain infants were believed to be born with the ability to communicate with spirits of the deceased during their first days of life, before the closing of the spirit door that occurred as their earthly consciousness fully developed. The parallels between Cherokee oral tradition and the events in Black Hollow became undeniable when Dr. Whitehorse discovered that the three midwife sisters were descendants of a Cherokee medicine woman named Ayanna Selu, who had been documented by missionary records as practicing pagan birthing rituals as late as 1847. According to the detailed genealogical research conducted by the Smithsonian's Bureau of American Ethnology, Ayanna had married a Scottish-Irish settler named Hamish Mac Reynolds in 1829, and their mixed-blood descendants had continued practicing modified versions of traditional Cherokee birth ceremonies, while outwardly adopting Christian customs to avoid persecution. The fusion of Celtic folk magic with Cherokee spiritual practices had created a unique tradition that the sisters had maintained in secret for over a century. Archaeological excavations conducted by West Virginia University in 1962 revealed that the sisters' stone cabin had been built directly over a Cherokee sacred site dating back at least 3 centuries. The dig, led by Dr. Marcus Thornbury, uncovered ceremonial pottery fragments, stone tools, and most significantly, dozens of small carved figures that appeared to represent infants or young children. Carbon dating performed at the Smithsonian Institution confirmed that some artifacts were over 500 years old, suggesting that the site had been used for birth-related ceremonies long before European settlement. Most remarkably, the carved symbols found on these ancient artifacts were nearly identical to the markings discovered in the sisters' journals, indicating an unbroken tradition of spiritual practice spanning multiple generations. The suppression of academic research into these connections began almost immediately after Dr. Whitehorse submitted her preliminary findings to the Cherokee Nation Cultural Committee in October 1962. According to correspondence found in her personal papers after her death in 1987, federal agents visited her university office in November 1960. 2. Confiscating all materials related to her Black Hollow research and informing her that her study had been classified under the National Security Act. Similar visits occurred at universities across the country, where researchers studying infant consciousness, traditional birthing practices, and paranormal phenomena found their funding suddenly withdrawn and their access to relevant materials mysteriously restricted. It was as if powerful forces were determined to ensure that the ancient knowledge preserved by the Black Hollow sisters would never again see the light of day. The official explanation for the Black Hollow phenomena emerged in a hastily published report by the Centers for Disease Control in March 1963, titled Neurological Anomalies in Rural Infant Populations, a Study of Environmental Factors. Written by a team of government physicians who had never actually visited the region. The report attributed the unusual infant vocalizations to a combination of environmental toxins from coal mining operations, nutritional deficiencies common in isolated mountain communities, and mass hysteria amplified by superstitious beliefs. The document, distributed to medical schools nationwide, dismissed decades of documented evidence as misinterpretation of normal infant development by medically untrained rural populations, effectively closing the book on what it termed a regrettable example of how folklore can masquerade as medical mystery. However, classified documents released through Freedom of Information Act requests in 1987 revealed a drastically different story. Internal CIA memos dated from 1962 to 1964 discussed the Black Hollow case under the codename Project Cradle Song, describing it as a phenomenon of extreme interest to national security due to potential applications in psychological warfare and intelligence gathering. The documents, heavily redacted but still revealing, indicated that federal authorities had conducted extensive analysis of Dr. Whitmore's original recordings using advanced acoustic equipment at Bell Laboratories. Their findings, according to a memo signed by CIA Director John M.C. Cohn, confirmed that the infant vocalizations exhibited linguistic complexity and harmonic frequencies that exceed current understanding of human developmental capabilities. The most shocking revelation came in a 1963 technical report prepared by Dr. Harold Friedman, a neuroscientist working under government contract at the Stanford Research Institute. His classified analysis, not declassified until 1995, demonstrated that the Black Hollow infants were producing vocalizations that matched frequency patterns associated with human speech, despite lacking the physical development necessary for such complex sound production. More disturbing still, when the recordings were played back to grieving family members who had lost relatives within the previous year. 73% reported recognizing specific vocal patterns, words, or phrases associated with their deceased loved ones. Dr. Friedman's report concluded that the infants appear to be accessing information that should be impossible for them to possess through normal sensory channels. The final piece of the puzzle emerged from the sisters' own writings, discovered in a lead-lined box buried beneath their cabin's stone foundation in 1963. The eldest sister's final journal entry, dated December 15, 1962, just days before the three women mysteriously vanished, revealed the terrifying truth about their decades-long practice. "The children are born with the door still open," she wrote in her spidery handwriting, able to hear the voices of those who have crossed over until their earthly minds grow strong enough to close the passage. "We have been the guardians of this sacred gift, but the shadow men in suits have learned our secret, and they want to use these blessed children for their own dark purposes. We must leave tonight, before they come for the babies themselves." The implications of her words sent shockwaves through the small circle of federal investigators who understood what the sisters had been protecting all those years. The Black Hollow case forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of consciousness, the boundaries between life and death, and the lengths to which authorities will go to suppress phenomena that threaten our understanding of reality. What happened in those remote Appalachian mountains suggests that human consciousness might be far more complex than mainstream science acknowledges. That perhaps we're born with abilities we lose as we grow, connections that are severed as our rational minds develop. The systematic suppression of research into infant consciousness, the classified nature of acoustic analysis that proved these babies were doing the impossible, and the complete erasure of 47 families from public records all point to a cover-up of staggering proportions. The three sisters themselves were never found, despite extensive federal manhunts that continued well into the 1970s. Their cabin site was eventually declared a federal wildlife preserve, effectively making it illegal for researchers or curiosity seekers to investigate further. But perhaps most chilling is what happened to the children who survived, those infants who exhibited the mysterious vocalizations, but whose families chose to stay in the region. According to sealed medical records obtained through FOIA requests, every single one of those children developed severe learning disabilities. By age 5, almost as if their unusual abilities had been deliberately damaged or suppressed through unknown means. Today, similar cases of impossible infant behaviors are immediately flagged by hospital computer systems and reported to federal authorities under protocols established in the wake of Black Hollow. Modern parents whose babies exhibit unusual vocalizations find themselves visited by child development specialists who recommend treatments that inevitably result in the cessation of the phenomena. The network of researchers who once studied consciousness in newborns has been systematically dismantled, their funding redirected, their findings buried in classified archives that may never see daylight. But here's what keeps me awake at night. If the government went to such extraordinary lengths to suppress evidence of babies communicating with the dead, what else are they hiding about the true nature of human consciousness? How many other communities have experienced similar phenomena, only to be silenced before the truth could emerge? And most terrifying of all, are there children being born right now with these same abilities, only to have them stripped away before they can tell us what they're really hearing in those quiet moments, when they seem to be listening to voices we can't perceive? What do you think? Have you ever witnessed a newborn exhibiting behaviors that seemed impossible for their age? Do you believe consciousness might extend beyond the boundaries of life and death? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you've had experiences with infants who seem to know things they shouldn't, don't be afraid to speak up. The truth has been buried for over 60 years, but it's not too late to uncover it. If this investigation sent chills down your spine, smash that like button to help us reach more people who aren't afraid to question official narratives. Subscribe and hit the notification bell. Our content frequently gets suppressed by algorithms that don't want these stories spreading. Share this video with friends who can handle the truth, because the more people who know about Black Hollow, the harder it becomes for authorities to keep similar cases hidden. And remember, in a world where powerful forces work to suppress uncomfortable truths, staying curious isn't just important, it's an act of rebellion.